Right, bonsoir. Welcome to the Philosophy Club here in sleepy Betete. And thank you for coming. It's a beautiful little village here. Very peaceful. And however, there have been 50 robberies in the last 2 weeks. And some of them quite serious. And we had a stabbing incident here in the middle of nowhere in the middle of France. So that's why I'm doing my Philosophy Club, is to teach morals, ethics and virtues, so that people don't choose the way of criminals and violence and all the rest. We don't want it here, thank you very much. We don't want it anywhere. We especially don't want it in Ukraine. And I'm part of the World Intellectual Wisdom Forum. We're discussing online with friends how we can get the intellectuals of the world to find a common morality that we can follow. I'm in touch with Ukrainian, Russian, French, German, British philosophers all over the place trying to understand how we can come back from the brink of nuclear Armageddon. The old systems of ideas don't work, so what can we put in their place? What kind of moral codes, what kind of philosophy? That includes nature, that includes ecology. So anyway, that's what we discuss here in the little philosophy club here in Betete. And welcome. Okay, so we're going to do what we've been doing the last couple of weeks. We're going to look at the periodic table and compare and contrast selected traditions. This table has been carefully put together over many years of teaching and research. It's the most up-to-date such map or guide to all the world's philosophical and religious traditions. And it's useful for analysing the complex relationships between them. So let's begin. Noah, what pair have you chosen to start with?
Okay, I'm going to tell you right now, after my finger has randomly choose. Okay, it's a new religion group.
Yeah.
Reiki.
Reiki, okay,
It's
fine.
94.
Yeah.
And the other one? Okay, a primal one.
Yes.
35. Central Asia, Turkey, Mongolian.
We had that last time.
Yes.
And you choose a different one.
For sure.
Because
What's the name?
we did that in depth.
Okay. This one is 120.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Mithraism, Survalism,
Yeah.
Mazdasnan, Ilm Ksnum.
Right, brilliant. Okay, that is a Persian religion, or a cluster of Persian faiths. Box 120. So thank you, that's great. Right, so what's the relationship between these two? One might think not a lot, but if, like with all these traditions, if you think of this as just the top of a three-dimensional geological map, and we're going to go into them, like in depth, in 3D. Let's start with the Persian ones. So there are 3 Persian ones, 120, 121 and 122 in the periodic table. The oldest, well, they're all very ancient. This box includes Mithraism. Now Mithras is a really interesting god. He appears in my tarot of the gods. He's the god of light. Mithras is the saviour of the world in Persian religion. And it was like a branch of Zoroastrianism. So your normal Zoroastrians go to the temple, they worship Ahura Mazda, the god of the universe, who created the universe, who's fighting a war against Angra Mainyu, who's the devil, who's the evil god. And it's a close-run thing. Nobody's quite sure who's going to win, even up to now. The devil is very strong, Angra Mainyu, very angry with God, with Ahura Mazda. So at some point, and different scriptures tell the story differently, Ahura Mazda created Mithras to be the lord of his forces of light. He's like St. Michael is to the Christians. And if you've been to Mont Saint-Michel, you know that on the top of the abbey on the mountain of Mont Saint-Michel off the coast of Normandy, there's a great statue of Archangel Michael holding a sword. and I've been up there and seen it and taken photographs. And it's a symbol of Michael is going to lead the forces of light at the war between God and Satan on behalf of Christ. Christ will defeat Satan in this final last battle, and Michael will be his guardian of the army, his angel. Interesting enough, St. Michael is the patron saint of all policemen and army officers, I discovered, and in all Christian countries. So that ideal is there. Mithras is the origin of the Michael legends. Mithras is more ancient, and he plays the same role for Ahura Mazda in the Persian Zoroastrian mythology, which is the origin of this whole myth plot. The whole plot of God versus the devil, and the Seishan, the saviour, is going to save and win, you know, and we discussed this last time, I believe. We did the Seishan and everything. So Mithras is his helper. Right, so it's a really profound and interesting teaching, and it was a secret oral tradition which was handed down to initiates in the ancient Persian world. When you were initiated into the secret teachings of Mithras, you had to swear to be truthful, kind, generous, magnanimous, etc., a good person, and courageous. And it spread among these Persians, who were pretty good warriors, actually, you know, but also among Persian intellectuals and philosophers. And although they were fighting the Romans in a battle for supremacy of the world, the Persian Empire and the Romans were fighting, where they met, they then made like secret pacts. So they initiated Roman officers into the cult of Mithras. And Roman officers who spoke Latin adopted this secret religion of Mithraism as their most favoured religion, which is like really weird. It's as if all the American army, when they went to Iraq to bash the Muslims, adopted Sufism in secret. And the upper grades, all the generals and lieutenant colonels of the American army and the Pentagon, were all now Sufis secretly. That's what happened with the Roman army and Mithraism. We know that because archaeologists have discovered about 300 Mithraic temples throughout the Roman Empire. There's a very famous one in Bordeaux, which is now rebuilt in the museum in the middle of Bordeaux, which is an amazing museum, the Bordeaux Town Civic Museum. And you go in there and you see it's like a temple rebuilt with the original stones that they found. Also in London, there was a big Mithraic temple, which is now rebuilt. It's by the Bank of England. And in York and in 350 places throughout the Roman Empire, these Mithraic temples. And between about 50 AD, round about the time of Christ, right up to the adoption of Christianity as the Roman religion, it was really the most important religion in Rome. And it's really weird that the Romans adopted it because it wasn't Roman. You know, it was the enemy's religion, the Persians. But they accepted it. And so scholars have written books about Mithraism, and Carl Jung wrote about it, because he was a kind of Gnostic god. He was a god who resolves paradoxes. And the images of him show like a lion-headed deity with a snake around his body, holding a torch. You know, this is a Gnostic symbol for enlightenment. Like when you transcend the opposites, you reach enlightenment, so you become like Mithras. And you work through the Mithraic grades. There were 7 of them. It took you 7 years to become a full initiate. And it was exactly like Freemasonry. You had to swear oaths at each grade, be tested, and one of the grades I like, one of the top ones, last but one, is called the Sun Runner. You had to run around the temple lodge holding a torch as if you were the sun, and pretend to be the sun running around, you know, like. And then the top grade, when you were level 7, after 7 years, you became what's called the pater, the father in Latin. And you became the father of the temple or the lodge. Not many people made it to that, you know. What's also interesting is that so the other thing that's really exciting is that we know that a lot of the Christian Roman Catholic symbols were taken from Mithraism. Mithras was born on the 25th of December. The Ted Pater, the father, the Pope, wore a mitre, which is a special hat worn by the popes and bishops. They had a special ring that you were given at that grade. You got the ring. And they had a staff, just like a shepherd's staff, which is what the popes have. So I've done my research on this. I put it in the Tower of the Gods book. I'm convinced 100% that the people that invented Roman Catholicism and said, let's have it as the religion of Rome, will take the New Testament, will accept Jesus as the Messiah, but we're going to keep our Mithraic structures intact. We're going to say that Jesus was Mithras come to earth. Right? And if you read St. Paul carefully, I think it's easy to see that St. Paul was a Mithraic initiate, because he uses all the correct words for a Mithraic initiate. He says about, let's be brave, let's put on the sword and the shield and fight the devil. We will ascend and become the victors in this fight. It's all Mithraic stuff. So this is my supposition. Paul was a Mithraic initiate who wanted to help humanity, wanted to help everyone. And he realised, oh my God, Jesus, that guy we crucified, that was Mithras come to earth to save us all. That's supposition, but it works, it fits. Now, that's one tradition. Now, there are still people that say, no, Jesus wasn't the only Mithras. There are other Mithrases, and the real Mithras hasn't come yet. We're still waiting for him. So there are little groups of esoteric people in Switzerland or Freemasons, are still waiting for the real Mithras to defeat the devil. Because although Jesus did a great job, and we love him, thank you very much, the devil's still around. He's still out there prowling about. Would say the true Mithraic initiates. Okay, so then the other one is Zervanism, this other Persian faith. Zervanism is also really interesting. A lot of Persian thinkers, philosophers, sages, couldn't quite work out this split between God and the devil. Ahura Mazda's the good god, Angra Mainyu's the bad god. Like, why would Ahura Mazda, the good god, create a bad god and give him so much power that they're always fighting and millions of people are killed? Why things like the Holocaust, World War II, World War I? That's all Angra Mainyu. Well, why would God give that power to the devil? So they came up with a theory. Maybe there was a third god, but beyond both of them, called Zervan. Zervan means endless time or eternity. Maybe Zervan is the creator of both of them, Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu. And maybe Zervan is sort of standing back, giving them time and space to fight the battles, just kind of watching it. Like when I was a kid, I used to make war games. When I was 9 and 10, it was my great thing at the weekend. I'd have a big battle with toy soldiers. And it was fun, I'd watch the battle, I'd play with my friends, we'd build little walls and shoot, and, it was all very harmless. But it was fun watching the battle for strategy. Maybe that's what Zervan is doing, said the Zervanites. And it became a thing within Zoroastrian. The mainstream Zoroastrians didn't like it, they called it a heresy. To say this is a heresy. But a lot of people... Otherwise, how do you explain this equality of good and evil? Why does evil have so much power? It was a theory. And then the Mazdaznan was a more modern form of like Persian religion in the 19th century, a revival movement associated with Ahura Mazda. So Mazdaznan is Mazda's movement. And this was a bunch of theosophists and esotericists in India, because the Zoroastrian community had gone to India and fled to Bombay from the Muslims. And they still flourish there, they have their temples and everything. But they were unbelievably intelligent, clever people. They adopted well to the British when we ruled India. they all learned to speak British English and became civil servants and MPs and things and intellectuals. And they created the Mazda movement to say, let's save the world. And they also advocated vegetarianism and yoga and meditation. And there's a series of esoteric books came out at that time. And this Ilmi Kshnum was a branch of this. This was like a theosophical movement that was saying, let's find the knowledge of the light that can save us. So these are all things that religious studies experts are studying. And, I estimate there's probably about 50,000 people at the moment on the planet that follow one of these traditions, including scholars that study them. Traces of it still live on in things like Freemasonry and in Sufism. Anyone with a moral brain who's trying to do right in the world is trying to be on the side of righteousness and light. And whether they know it or not, they're a devotee of Mithras. And anyone that, is trying to help defend victims or prevent robberies and prevent chaos and violence is helping, Mithras, who's the secret deity behind St. Michael and all the others. So that's that one, right? It's very interesting. In the whole of history, maybe 5 million people have followed those paths. Now so how does this relate to Reiki? Right. As you probably know, Reiki is a largely Japanese new religious movement. And Qi is the word for energy, Qi in Chinese, Taoism. A Reiki master is someone that can work with Qi, the invisible energy, and that can heal people through Reiki. I mean, it's a healing practice, but it's more than that, it's a philosophical practice. So the Reiki master has to understand the invisible currents and energies that flow through life. The whole planet is awash with these invisible currents and energies. Science and physics knows this. Electromagnetic waves, gravitational waves. But then there's something else. Let's call them consciousness waves, which flow also in ways we haven't yet learned to measure. And the Reiki master has to be able to tune in with that. Now, when you're confronted with a sick or ill person who's in pain, the Reiki master will just try and channel the healing energies of the cosmos to that person. They don't even have to touch the body. They just put their hands around the aura of the body, because they believe that just as the earth has these healing currents, so does our human body. And if you hold your hands in the right place, in the right way, you can channel these divine rays to the affected parts of the body. So if you've got a stomach ache or a headache or, whatever, it can help. It's a thing you learn. You do trainings. There are 3 levels of training. It's quite a big thing. There are thousands of people who've trained. I've known quite a few Reiki masters. Often women train at it. It was founded by a Japanese guy who was kind of a Buddhist, but he was also kind of a Christian. And he also liked Tibet. So he I don't think he actually went to Tibet, but he studied Tibetan Buddhism. And he downloaded some ideas from Tibetan Buddhism. And he mixed them all up together and he called it Reiki. There's at least about 80,000 people practicing it in the world now. Probably about 200,000 in total, since it was invented. Back in it sort of started in the 1920s, 30s. But it didn't really take off in the West till after World War II, till the 60s, 70s. And then it's become much more popular. So what's the connection between the two? Okay, so they're starting from the two ends of the same problem, I would say. The Zoroastrian magus, or priest, magi, is working on the cosmic battle between good and evil, between health and death, between life and death, between love and hatred. They're trying to balance these energies and ensure that the good forces win, that the patient recovers. And the patient is the whole planet. It's everyone. There's 8 billion of us, and we're divided into nations, races, religions. This is a tool for planetary healing, this thing. So I'm working at that level of the Magus who works with planetary healing, as do all these Mithraic types, right, and Freemasons and things. The Reiki person is working one-to-one with the individual person as a healer, guide, which is incredibly important, because Carl Jung, who's one of my great heroes, was once asked to write a paper for UNESCO at the end of World War II, and they asked him, Carl, write, a 50-page document. How can we save the world from self-destruction? Write your theories. He wrote a paper. It was never published, but what he said in the paper was, and his answer in one line in his letter was, we can only save this world one person at a time, like one by one. And that was this. He was obviously a therapist who worked one-to-one. So he was sort of straddling the two. Jung's ideas are relevant to the Reiki master who deals with a person. Maybe they've got mental illness, maybe they're psychotic, maybe they've got grief, maybe someone has just died that they love. How do you help them? Well, the Reiki master knows what to do, right? And then how do you deal with someone whose country's been destroyed, or like 8 million people from Ukraine that have had to flee their country because it's been bombed? They're in deep grief. They're scattered around Europe. How do we help them? That's where Mithras comes in, and the soldiers of light. So I can see a link, and I have a book upstairs by a professor of Sanskrit at the University of Harvard, who's traced the myths and legends and religions of mankind back, like I've done, back to like 20, 30,000 BC. He says there are certain clusters of legends. You can tell these African stories, or these Australian stories, or these American Indian ones. They all go back to common roots, including the Japanese ones. He studied all the Japanese legends. And he says they must go back to common roots about 50, 60,000 years ago. He's called Professor Witzel. He's begun to ask how we can reconstruct all that. I've not met him, but one of his students came to me and offered me a Tibetan Buddhist bell from Harvard University Religious Studies Club, who knew him and studied with him when I was in the castle in Scotland. So, yeah, Witzel is asking the right questions. And what that points to is that the Japanese guys who are inventing Reiki, are like another version of the same stories of the Zoroastrian legends that do Mithras, and it's the same work. It's all about planetary healing. Okay, that's that one, my answer to that.
Thank
Is that
you
all
very
right?
much. Yes.
Good. Excellent. They're fascinating, those two. Right, sir, have you chosen a couple?
Yeah, I'm going to do the same.
It works.
It's like the Ouija board, yeah. You'll be guided by spirits.
Oh, no, not this one, okay. No, not this one. Okay.
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 I thought your finger was on the Socratics here. The
Yeah,
yellow ones.
but let's see something I don't know really. Something like yeah, 144 philosophy, aestheticism,
And the arts, okay.
and something like yeah, and 50 Christian Rosicrucianism. I don't know what is it.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Right. Right, thank you. Those are very interesting, those ones. Well, let's start with the arts one. So this is very much, you're visiting here as a musician, and you are a composer and you love music and the arts. So, and the whole museum is dedicated to the 9 muses. We're in the room of Apollo, who's the musicates. But we have rooms to music, to poetry, to literature, to fine art, and so on. This box 144 is the box for all the artists of the world. They say we can only save the world through art. These are the great artists, like in music, you know, Beethoven, Mozart. They dedicated their lives to music, to create a world of beauty and harmony, so that people will become better people. This is why musicians write music. It's why I love music and compose and write. Both Beethoven and Mozart were Freemasons, actually, and they had a moral sense of what they were doing as musicians. A friend of mine wrote a PhD thesis on the influence of Freemasonry on music. It was profound. And there have been many great Christian musicians like Massenet and you know, all the great Renaissance musicians creating church music and so on. So this box, aestheticism, is for the fine arts and all the great painters. Here in La Creuse we had this school, l'École Croissant, it's called, where painters would come down from Paris during the 19th century on the train, which had just got as far as Châteauroux. Then they'd get like a cart and horse and come to the valley of La Creuse, and they would then put up their easel and paint. And we have Monet in particular liked coming. He painted these amazing sunsets. When I first came to La Creuse, I was blown away by the sunsets in the evening. They're just stupendous, the colours, and he obviously had the same feeling, so he painted these amazing sunsets. And Fresseline, there's a museum of artists who used to come here, which is worth seeing. So this, I respect the artists. I mean, I'm an artist of poetry. I write poetry. If all else fails, if my teaching fails, my books, my music, everything, I will still go on writing poetry, you know, till the day I die, because that is my final testimony. You know, I don't care if nobody reads it, because people don't read poetry hardly ever. And because I'm not famous, I'm not, you know, like published by Faber and Faber, and I'm not T.S. Eliot. So, but I'm doing the work of a true poet, you see, because I work in the tradition of The White Goddess, Robert Graves' great book of The White Goddess, which talks about a true poet is in service to the goddess. In the British Isles, as a Celtic place, we honour the ancient druids and bards of Britain and Ireland, which is where I come from. And in Gaul as well. You know, the true poets of France were bards, and they still are. And we try to use poetry for peace, so that, you know, a good poet, this is what the tradition says, a good poet could stop a battle by going into the middle of the battle and reciting a poem that both sides would listen to and say, you know what, this killing thing is ridiculous. We'd rather do poetry. You know, open the wine. A true poet could do that. They would have the stature and the authority and the magic. And a true poet could just channel a poem to do that. They don't have to write and read it. This is before writing. This is before there was writing. True poets, says the White Goddess and all the research I've done into Druidry, had to do it by channeling it from spirit, direct. You know, and it was regarded as something really, really sacred. A true poet was like one step away from being a druid. And they had authority over the kings and the warriors and the, you know, the politicians. The trouble with the world today is we don't listen to our poets. We listen to like Twitters by innate, ridiculous, fake politicians that tell lies. A true poet had to tell the truth, always, which is what I do in my poetry, but also in ordinary life. So I take poetry very seriously. I am a full-on proper bard and poet, and also take singing very seriously, because if you put those poems into music, you can then shift mountains. Okay, and that tradition lives on. You know, fortunately, there are. I mean, I've been to poetry festivals. The most incredible ones were in Struga in Macedonia, where I met poets from all over the world at that level. You know, I met bards from Romania, from Russia, from America, from Israel, from Estonia, you know, who would understand what I've just said. And they would say, yeah, Thomas, we're with you, you know. So I set up the Order of Peace Poets there, which still exists and is based here in the Musée. And so, alors, ça continue. But all arts are sacred to me, and that's why I take the Muses idea very seriously, that these goddesses, they inspire the true artist. Nowadays there's new art, you know, there's cyber art, there's website design, there's all kinds of digital art being created. There's fashion, there's beauty, there's body painting. You know, the arts are in constantly being reinvented by each generation. If I reincarnate in 200 years from now, I wonder what arts will be around. I still think there'll be the core of them. Mm-hmm. There's the visual ones, using colour and stuff. There's the sonic ones, using music and sound. There's dance, which is another form of art, which is very sacred. And we sometimes do dancing here. That's very primordial, right? Rhythmic movement to sound goes back at least 30,000 years. If you read Graham Hancock's book Supernatural, he reckons that the maguses and shamans of the Magdalenian culture in the Dordogne were all doing magic dancing in their underground caves with torches and drums and stuff. Of course they were. You know, that's they were having the equivalent of. So today's trance dance culture, which you know, I've been to Stonehenge type revels in Britain. Those youngsters are celebrating this dance tradition exactly the same as those primordial ancestors, and they should be entitled to do it. You know, dance, don't make war. And so the Ibiza kids that go and do their great raves and, you know, take ecstasy, they're just following on that footsteps of the Dionysian tradition, because Dionysus liked the dance. Theatre's also part of the arts, and in the Periodic Table, the book, I explain, you know, all the great playwrights and stuff. So Shakespeare to me was a master of the arts. I used to act. I love acting. I love the stage. All the world is the stage. I've written a couple of plays. You know, if I had enough time, I would write another 10 plays. You know, I'd love to see them performed. I love Molière. I love the French theatrical tradition, and you know, I'd love there to be more money for the arts instead of for war. I'd love everybody to be able to get a stipend to be an artist or a poet or a playwright or a musician from the state, and all you have to do is like produce a couple of masterpieces every year. That would be a beautiful world, instead of millions and millions for each of the missiles that are raining down on Kyiv and all the other cities. So this battle we're doing here in the Musée, with this box, which is very important, the arts, is the fight back by the Muses against the tyranny of ignorance. When Plato set up the academy and made a temple of the Muses, you know, he's my line manager. He was saying, come on guys, let's take it on. You know, let's do this. Let's celebrate the arts. Okay, that's that one, 144. How does that relate to number 50, the Rosicrucian? Okay. Rosicrucianism is very interesting. It's a branch of esoteric Christianity that flourished in the early 1600s in Europe here. It was associated with some very interesting intellectuals who were living at a time when European Christianity was torn into Protestants versus Catholics. And they would not get on. They couldn't agree on anything. They had different stories of what is truth, what should we do, what is righteousness. You know, the Puritans, the Protestants were very severe. You couldn't have paintings. The women couldn't wear lipstick. I mean, God, are you kidding? They had to wear black. Everything had to be really conforming to rigid, strict protocols.